Hello, guys, and welcome into the Underrated Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Maxwell Dorn, and today we are doing something a little bit differently. We are analyzing 10 teams out of the IG Fantasy Football Empire League on Instagram. It was a 20-team fantasy football draft. It was a slow draft, so this took over a month to do. All the accounts took this extremely seriously. Today, we actually have one of the accounts on the show to discuss these 10 teams that we're going to talk about, and he is Angelo from Trash Talk Podcast. Angelo, how you doing today?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I'm super excited to talk about these 10 teams. We're kind of diving into what I would say the most active teams in this league that are, some of them are a little over the top, but that's all right. We still love them anyways. But yeah, so we're going to jump into this and let's get it. Drop that intro, baby. All right, now diving into these first two teams, we're going to start talking about our own teams first. Angelo, what did you think about your draft in this 20-man slow draft league?
So basically how I felt about my team is that I wanted to come into this draft with the most balanced approach that I could. 20 teams is a lot of teams. I know that everyone in that league probably isn't used to drafting in 20 teams, and I do a lot of larger format mock drafts and things like that to learn our player pool. So I felt pretty confident going in, but with the one running back and one main wide receiver approach, I really wanted to nail my running back position with my early pick, so I grabbed Ezekiel Elliott. Now, obviously, today it looks a little bit hazy, but I'm not really worried about Elliott in Dallas. I know he's going to be back. He probably just wants to skip sweating and practice a little bit and get a little bit more cash. But other than that, it's all about looking for value in 20-person teams. It's all about looking at your total lineup. So I feel like we really did a pretty good job there overall.
Yeah, no. Are you worried about the Jerry Jones remarks at all? That was towards Zeke, saying that they don't need a rushing champion in Dallas to bring home a title?
Which is super hypocritical because the only other championships he won, he had Emmitt Smith, and but no,
he's like starting to take over that Le'Veon Bell role in the headlines. Similar, just always something like drama going on lately. Which is, when he plays, he's a top 2 back in the league, hands down.
Absolutely. For the last 3 years, he's been on the top of the charts. He's going to get the work. And keep in mind, that's with him not scoring 10-plus TDs every year. Now, obviously, he's getting involved in the pass game. He's getting some TDs out of that. But just as far as rushing touchdowns, he's not in the top tier where he's actually being drafted. But the yardage, the passing role now, and just that is really keeping him alive. He gets the volume.
Yeah, no, and I think you got a really nice balance with your team. I think that's what a lot of teams lack in this league is nice balance throughout. And what I was kind of looking for on draft day was just number one options, on a squad, just like guys who are going to be like pivotal in their roles every single week, and you have a lot of guys like that, like Allen Robinson could really come into fruition this year if that pays off. Robbie Anderson, I like that pick a lot. Now with the injury with A.J. Green, I think Tyler Boyd, I think last year it was a little bit shell shock because I don't think he expected to go into the season and be the number one wide receiver, so I think that's why it maybe it was a little bit harder on him getting acclimated. But I think that this year kind of having that mindset where he has to go in and he has to be the number one, I think that Tyler Boyd's going to be extremely solid this year and you're getting great value for him in drafts.
Yeah, and keep in mind, too, Zach Taylor coming in from that Rams system, he's already been very clear about what he's going to do when he gets behind the helm, and that's going to be a very high-powered offense is what he's aiming for. And if you look at the splits on the Rams, Cooper Kupp is a beast, and he makes the rest of his team a beast. And I feel like Tyler Boyd showed that last year. A.J. Green's a guy I'm not high on. There's injury risk, things like that. I'm not saying not to draft him, but I had a feeling that Tyler Boyd could go from a number 2 wide receiver in fantasy and have that upside of number 1. And even if A.J. Green comes back, it really only helps his cause.
No, really. Yeah, no, because we saw with the stat when people did the split how much better Tyler Boyd was with AJ Green. So we'll see how that plays out. But now we're going to just jump into my team, underrated fantasy football's team. I'm pretty happy with my team overall. I think I could have done a little bit better from the wide receiver aspect in the bottom half. I got Devontae Adams at pick 10. So I like that. The Kerryon Johnson pick coming back at 10 again in the second round. I think it's going to pay off, honestly, especially since them getting rid of Theo Riddick. I think that kind of just like sets in stone that Kerryon's in for a big workload this season. What do you think?
Well, I just put a post up about Kerryon today. If you look at how he scored in those last 6 games after the bye that he was in, he was averaging 18 points a week. If he's getting more than 48% of the snaps, he's going to get you 12 to 15 points without any doubt. Everyone is saying that Detroit doesn't run the ball. Patricia is an offspring of Belichick. But if you look at it, Johnson is one of those guys that doesn't need a monstrous workload to be productive in fantasy. I love it. I think it's a knockout pick. I don't think you can go wrong.
Right, yeah. I think he's just one of those names that isn't super flashy on draft day, along with Devontae Adams. Because like I said, I got Devontae Adams. I don't think those guys are really like super, super scary. But when it comes playing time every week, those guys are as consistent as it gets. Going down a little bit farther down my roster, a guy that's starting to worry me now. Like I said, this draft took a month to do. So as training camp's coming around, different players are starting to fall in and out. One of the guys that I'm starting to worry about, actually 2 of them that I'm worried about now, is Kenyon Drake and Sammy Watkins. What's your outlook on those guys coming in?
Well, I was I wouldn't say high on Drake, but I like Drake's upside.
Right, me too.
It looks like Kalen Ballage may be the go-to back there, which I'm really surprised because Kenyon Drake is a freak athletically. When he was given the opportunity in Gase's offense, he produced.
Right.
So where did the fall off happen? What happened there? I think more needs to develop in camp. You know, everyone needs to kind of pump the brakes in a sense because it's the first week of training camp. All of your rookies look great. All of your second, third string guys are playing with the first team, and there's a lot of rumors being spread. So don't panic. They're giving these guys the opportunity to earn their second string, third string spot because they want to see what they can do with the first team. This may not mean anything for Drake. It's going to be a share. We knew that, but it could very well still be 65-35 in Drake's favor, somewhere around those parts.
Right, yeah, no, it just makes me a little nervous because coming into the season, I truly thought he was going to be the number 1 back in Miami. Playing from behind, I thought he was going to get a lot of scat back plays and stuff like that. But coming out of camp, them saying that Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to be leading the Dolphins, that makes me feel a lot better being a Kenyon Drake owner because I know that Fitzpatrick likes to throw the ball. They're going to be moving the ball, taking risks. Josh Rosen, I think, would just slow them down a little bit. I don't know if he's going to get in the lineup this year. We'll see. But moving on to our next team, and that's Fantasy Footballer UK. He was on the show with myself and Angelo on Angelo's show. So if you want to go check out the Trash Talk podcast, that's on Spotify. Are you guys on any other platforms?
Yeah, we are on Spotify. That episode in particular is not on YouTube,
Okay.
But you can check us out on Facebook as well. We're on Buzzsprout. We're on Stitcher, soon to be Apple Podcasts. We're just waiting for Apple to stop playing around.
I know. Yeah, you said that last episode.
Yeah.
What's going on with that? Is there some
Haven't heard a word. We got to reach out to our Buzzsprout support team. Figure out what's happening there.
Cool. So we'll jump into UK's team a little bit. What I really like about his team is he's got the 2 solid wide receivers with DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs, and then James White. You could tell he really played his team super heavy on PPR, and he's trying to benefit the most from that. I like Henry a lot as well. Duke Johnson's got upside. Now that he's been complaining that he wants to leave Cleveland, they keep saying that he's going to be getting a lot more work. What do you think about UK's team?
I gotta tell you, UK's team was a team that I really liked, and initially he wasn't in like my top 3, but he was definitely in my top like 6 to 10 for sure. He's moving up. The question mark is still the running back. That has not changed for me as much. I do think Duke Johnson does get some play, to piggyback off what you were saying, because they're going to want to trade him. or they're just going to kind of run him into the ground.
Right.
Either of those things could happen. I like Wilson. Still, like I said, the running backs are a little questionable, but the receivers are great. And on top of it now, he has D.D. Westbrook. And D.D. Westbrook was a guy I kind of wanted to see how it worked out with Foles when he went to camp.
Right.
And Foles and him have a great rapport. Foles loves his slot receiver. And Foles is going back into a coaching system with Jeff DiFilippo from Philadelphia. Or, I'm sorry, John DiFilippo from Philadelphia. So everything is kind of falling into place there. Somebody's going to have to be there to get the targets. He very well may only need to start one running back a week, if
Right.
maybe... He loved his tight end, his Lacoste pick. He loved that one.
Yeah.
So that could be a guy maybe he starts in turn there if the running backs don't pan out.
Yeah, no, who knows? The one thing I will say is that he went extremely deep at running back, like kind of realizing that he didn't really have a strong running back core because he definitely swung for the fences at the end there, picking up Carlos Hyde, which could pay off huge. If Carlos Hyde came out and was the number one back on Kansas City, that would just be ginormous for him. C.J. Anderson, knock on wood, I don't want anything to happen to Kerryon, but if something did, he would definitely have a role in the fantasy football world. Overall, I think he's got a great team, good balance, but like you said, just a little bit of question at the running back position.
Well, real quick, just to touch on C.J. Anderson, I'm curious to get your approach on this. I like C.J. Anderson, but here's my thing. He was on 3 teams last year until he actually got into a high-powered system that almost anybody, it seems like, can be plug and played into the Rams offense as long as they fit that role. Is he going to do that in Detroit? I don't know. He didn't do it in 2 other teams before LA last year, and I honestly think there was a bit of luck involved in that. I could see if one team passes on him and he goes to the Rams, but you figure he was cut by 3 teams in a calendar year before that Super Bowl. I'm not worried about C.J. Anderson taking Kerryon's role, and I'm more nervous about the Detroit offense if C.J. Anderson's the running back and doesn't pan out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not particularly worried. That was some very valid points, though, for him getting cut. I mean, maybe it was just a scheme of Sean McVay over in L.A., so you never know, but he was definitely showing out a little bit at the end of last year. As long as they don't use him as like a power back or something and they let Kerryon finish up work, I think Kerryon's going to be extremely valuable. I was just saying if Kerryon got hurt, C.J. Anderson could definitely develop something. But like you said, the efficiency might not be there for that role, so... we're going on to one of the more high-powered teams. This guy took a risk in the draft, and it really panned out for him. Let's talk about FF Bros a little bit. What do you think about his team and that Elite 3, let's call it?
So, overall, I think the Bros have a really solid team. They were a team that I needed to kind of go back and research a little bit off of my initial grade. But this is a powerhouse team, really, if you look at it now. There are a couple questions marks, but overall, Drew Brees, Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, Tyreek Hill, Funches, those names pop out at you for sure. They got a nice main core.
Right.
The problem is when you're looking at how this league breaks down, where it's quarterback, running back, wide receiver, 3 flex, tight end. So that's a lot of positions there, and the flex is where you're going to win your money. I think a lot of these guys have pretty even teams for the most part, especially look at them on paper.
Right.
But after Tyreek Hill, I love Devin Funches in a regular 12-person redraft league where there's not as much risk involved. But you're hoping on guys like Adam Humphries, Peyton Barber, Equina St. Brown, Jimmy Graham. And I just feel like their overall starting lineup against some of the top 3, top 5 teams, they're going to have some problems. But I think it's a good team. They're going to put up some good wins.
No, definitely. I agree with you as far as the top 3 aspect. I think they got a nice core top 3 with Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, Tyreek Hill. If all those guys go off in a week, I think he's more than likely going to win every single week if those guys, all 3 of them, pair something together. But what the problem is, if one of those guys don't show up, I think it may be an issue for him just because of the Peyton Barber word coming out that Ronald Jones is a true contender for that starting role this year. That came out.
Yeah,
this week.
It looks like he's going to be the guy.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely more of a splashy player, like bigger plays, but always issues. I watched this one video of Ronald Jones catching this deep pass from Jameis Winston, and immediately after he fumbled right away. So it seems that there's always something with that guy. Like he's definitely so talented because you see it. Like he's elusive. He looks good on the field, but who knows? So if Peyton Barber's still getting some in between the tackle work, I just don't have faith in that. Bruce Arians coming in. We saw David Johnson just absolutely suffer last year. He couldn't figure it out. Devin Funchess, I don't know. If Devin Funchess, I think, is going to be a hit or miss guy, but I think if he misses, he's going to put up like 3 points or something like that because so many options.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be – he's going to dip out. He's definitely a guy that you need to be – to own him is to be experienced or to be in a jam, one or the other, because luck is a big part of it as well. But Funchess is going to steal red zone targets. That's what he's going to do. That's why you're drafting him. You hope he's that big body that Andrew Luck loves. I think he's more of a vulture for guys like Ebron and Doyle than he is for any real fantasy purposes. But I do like him. I don't know if I want to start him week 1 and punch that ticket.
Right. No, the only thing that I'll say before we get off this team is that I just don't want a guy in a PPR format, a full point PPR that I'm only banking on a touchdown for. I want a guy with a little more consistency, especially in a team, a 20 team draft that is as large as this. I want that more balance. I'd rather have a guy who's going to get me 9 or 10 every week than the guy who's going to dip down some weeks and get me like 3 points. So.
Well, if he had, let's say, Funches as his very last flex and had a guy like, Kiki Qt, Larry Fitzgerald, right. Somebody, Allen Robinson, Robbie Anderson. So one of those guys, if they were there, well, then I'd be like, okay, you know what? I like that Funches pick a lot more now because there's some stability there. But that's a guy who's going to be very boom or bust, and I'm worried that the booms might not even be that big.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's no question he's got one of the top teams in the league. Just with that Elite 3, taking the risk on Tyreek Hill. Before the news came out, it paid off. He got him. So I think it's going to be a very deadly team. I'm just going to have to see how the bottom half of that roster pans out. If the bottom half of the roster pans out, it's going to be a tough team to beat. Yeah, so moving on, let's jump into the fantasy football winners team. Let me find these guys right here.
So they have Andrew Luck, Todd Gurley, Tevin Coleman, Cooper Kupp, Kiki Qt, Larry Fitzgerald, Evan Ingram, and the Eagles defense. Overall, I don't hate this team. I'm very nervous about Gurley. I do love Coleman, but I felt like it was a little bit of a reach on Coleman there. I'm not quite sold that he's the number one. Now, the news with McKinnon being hurt and all that fun stuff, and Shanahan runs a high-powered offense as well, so there's definitely points to be had there. He has some later-round running backs like Miles Sanders, who I am putting out the warning. Do not draft Miles Sanders early in drafts. In Dynasty, maybe, but in a redraft PPR league, there is no reason to go after him. Take Jordan Howard if you want a part of that Eagles backfield like 4 rounds later. Much more worth it. But winners receivers are really good as well. I do love Kupp. I like QT if he can stay healthy. I really like Fitzgerald. He's a guy that I think people are kind of sleeping on. You're forgetting it's still Larry Fitzgerald with a whole bunch of young guys. And all those rookies they drafted, Isabella and Humbert is the other guy. They were both drafted ahead of Keyshawn Johnson. And Keyshawn Johnson looks like he's going to be the number 3 wide receiver there.
Right, yeah, no. I agree. I like this team from the aspect of like one of the things that I take in on draft day is I love drafting West Coast teams because they always play later, and I feel like those primetime games, sometimes I feel like fantasy football players show up a little bit more, and he got those with Cooper Kupp and Tevin Coleman. I think Tevin Coleman, if he shows out to be the number 1 back, like the lead back all year in a Kyle Shanahan offense over there for the 49ers, I think he's going to have a very productive year. It could be a similar role. I could see what happened with when Kyle Shanahan was in Atlanta with Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman in the similar role, but maybe he puts Tevin Coleman in the Devontae Freeman role this year. I really like that pick. And he kind of has like what I was talking about some teams don't have. I like his team's consistency a lot here just because I think that he's got guys that are going to get, 4 to 8 receptions every game with Larry Fitzgerald and Kiki Qt. And I think Tevin Coleman, they just brought him in and paid him a lot of money, so he's definitely going to have a role. Ingram, the more we see with these players dropping down, Golden Tate, 4-game suspension, Sterling Shepard. I think Sterling Shepard's good, though. Did you hear about him?
Yeah, well, it's the thumb. Yeah. So It's definitely something to keep an eye on. I do know that the thumb injuries are not as intense as it may seem.
Right.
It is a tough injury though when you're a receiver.
No, definitely. And I'm sure they're being pretty precautious with it too. But I like Todd Gurley this year. I mean, if he's getting the red zone work for the Rams, I think he's a number one running back. If he's getting it inside the 25, if that keeps him fresh, then whatever works. I've seen.
That's my fear, though.
Really?
That's my exact fear is he's going to lose. A lot of insiders, from what I'm reading, it's about 30 to 35% of the share his attempts last year that he's going to lose. The problem with that for me is what if that's mostly red zone work where they're going to stack the box, they're smashing your running back, and if you really want to keep him to get you into the red zone and figure out the rest, that seems to make more sense to me. Like, where am I going to draw his touches back? He may get a red zone target here and there or a run, in a big situation. But on a week in, week out basis over the course of the year, I'm a little nervous that they're going to lose the red zone work.
Oh, yeah. See, I think that's where I think personally that's where I think they're going to use him the most and try to keep him fresh, and that's where they're going to let Darrell Henderson kind of carry the workload and get him there in prime time, because they got Gurley for I don't know exactly the contract, but I think they got him for 4 more years, and he's the highest paid running back in the NFL. So I think that they're going to have to try to make it more of a longevic kind of role, and they're not going to not want to use him just because they're paying him so much money. But we'll see how it pans out. Who knows? What if Darrell Henderson just comes out and explodes, takes away the workload? I think that Winter's got a pretty solid team. I like it. I think it's going to be a pretty consistent team, probably a little bit in the upper half, but nothing that I don't really got anything else to say about it.
For sure. Just one thing I want to touch on before we change teams here is we were talking about Henderson. Henderson's good. He's got a great role, but he's definitely more of the third down back, passing back kind of guy. I think if something was to happen to Gurley, a guy like Malcolm Brown is the guy that you really want if you're going to go and get a piece of that backup role over there in LA.
Okay.
Malcolm Brown is much more the bigger body battering ram, and I think that Henderson's role will actually stay a little bit more similar than you think, and they really seem to like Brown, and Brown's getting a good amount of touches as well, so he's definitely a name to keep an eye on.
Yeah, they re-signed him from last year too, right?
Yeah.
No, he was actually.
They wanted him.
Yeah, I read about it actually. He was the Lions actually signed him, but he was on a team option, so they matched the option out what the Lions offered him, so they got him back. So yeah, maybe he is a key feature. That's like the type of stuff that makes me a little bit worried about Gurley, though, when they're bringing in these, like, drafting a guy and then they're re-signing Brown to make sure that he's there. That's what only scares me. But I think Gurley, hopefully he still gets the workload. But we're moving on. We're going down to the fantasy coaches team. Let me find this guy's team. This is a team that I really liked coming out of the draft. One of my favorites. With Dalvin Cook at the starting running back, I think that's a lot of upside. Obviously, injuries always been an issue, but when he's out there, this guy catches the ball a lot more. I think people forget how much he catches the ball. What do you think about Dalvin Cook coming into this year, Angelo?
I'm feeling pretty good about Cook. I'm staying optimistic. I'm not really staying away from where his ADP is in the beginning to middle of the second round. I think let some guys get scared of him. That's okay. Go ahead and take him. I would draft him with confidence. Fantasy coach's team's pretty good. I know he feels some kind of way about Winston and Stafford, and there's safer picks there. I do like Cook. Murray's a sneaky pick. His receiving core is I feel like maybe a bit underrated by me previously. Hilton, very safe, very consistent. Ridley is a name that I think everybody needs to watch for sure.
Right.
I love Calvin Ridley. MVS is another guy who can play some big games. John Brown seems to be the guy.
He's sneaky.
Yeah.
He's
and then Trey Quinn. So he's got upside. He's got some nice lottery tickets. And then you round that all off with O.J. Howard,
right,
who has a decent opportunity to be the guy there and catch some of those missed targets that are available.
Right, yeah, no, he's got the little double dip with O.J. Howard and Jameis Winston. I mean, that could pay off big just because we see when O.J. Howard makes plays, he makes a lot of big plays. Where would you be comfortable taking Dalvin Cook coming around in like a 12-man draft? Are you pulling him in the second, or is he a guy you got to wait? Or are you like first round in him, waiting to the third? What are you thinking?
Well, if he can stay healthy, and he looked pretty good at the tail end of last year,
Right,
you know that's
definitely.
the thing that makes me kind of move it up a little bit. There are some question marks with guys like Damian Williams, James Conner. I think he's right in that conversation because he also has some similar question marks.
Right.
But yeah, I'm thinking in the beginning of the second round. I don't know if I would reach into the first. Typically, in that position, I might want to come back and grab a Dalvin Cook or a James Conner or even Bell if he falls,
Yeah, definitely.
and grab a top end receiver like a Devontae Adams, Hopkins, somewhere along those lines.
Right. Yeah. No, I like Dalvin Cook this year as long as he can stay healthy. I know that the Vikings revamped that offensive line this offseason because that was a big issue. Kirk Cousins was absolutely getting lit up last year. So, but
They're sneaky. They could be a contender this year.
yeah, I mean, I'm a Packer fan, so it's hard for me to agree with any team in my division because since we haven't made the playoffs in 2 years, I'm like pretty salty just towards everyone in our division, especially. But yeah, no, they got a good team, a great defense. Harrison Smith on the other side of the ball. Kirk Cousins, I mean, maybe since they built up that line, he'll have a little bit better year. But getting back to fantasy coaches team, I'm a little hesitant on Jameis Winston. I think it kind of sounded like you were as well.
Yeah, it's not that I don't like Winston, but every year it's like his year. He's
Right.
very much like Devontae Parker, where he's just, oh, this is the year. Make sure you draft him, have him on your team.
Right.
I'm not buying into it anymore. I mean, he probably didn't. I don't know where he drafted him, but he probably didn't reach very far.
No.
Same thing with Stafford. So there's safer picks on the back end of a draft. You
Yeah,
know.
no, right. I mean, overall, I think this team is another one of those teams that did a great job in just having that consistency. I think Latavius Murray, if he can handle that Mark Ingram role efficiently, I think he'll be definitely fantasy relevant this year, maybe in 12-team leagues. I would say that he would probably be a flex this upcoming season. After Latavius, it makes me a little bit worried. TJ Yeldon, Quadri Allison. I'm not big on those guys. What I do really like is his receiving core. T.Y. Hilton, he's one of those guys that, I mean, he's probably going to be a high-end wide receiver 2 and give you some wide receiver 1 performances this year. And I really like Calvin Ridley. I think Calvin Ridley, honestly, could be a wide receiver 2 this year if he has the same productivity previous to last. I think the touchdowns fall a little bit for Calvin Ridley, but I think the receptions go up because I think they're going to try to get him a lot more involved this season.
Well, they spent a lot of money on their offensive line as well over the last like 5 years. Atlanta. I'm not as high on Devontae Freeman, but I do think that Ridley and Julio Jones both could be top 15 receivers at the end of the year. I think they could be maybe not as high of a ceiling as Juju and Brown,
Right.
but definitely in that conversation for sure. It's a possibility.
Yeah. And then the last guy I'm going to touch on quick before we move on from coach's team is OJ Howard. And OJ Howard is honestly a guy that I'm huge on this year. I think he's going to break out. In our stats, we did the predictions with fantasy football or NFL predictions like earlier in the season back in July. And I had OJ Howard as my third tight end finishing over Zach Ertz this upcoming season. What do you think about that?
Well, what's funny is I had OJ Howard behind in those initial rankings. I believe I did them with you. And now, when Trash Talk Fantasy, when we did our podcast on our tight ends, we were talking about it, and I'm like, wow, actually, I really like OJ Howard. He's
Right.
got a great catch percentage. It's really really high. There's 200 and I think 30 some targets that are now available in Tampa. Somebody's got to get them.
Yeah, right.
And I think OJ Howard's a big body, easy target. The only thing that worries me is OJ Howard had really good numbers with Fitzpatrick. His numbers weren't as impressive with Jameis Winston, and Jameis Winston really likes Cameron Brate. So I have to kind of pump my brakes a little bit and not get too excited. So I kind of keep him right around that fourth, fifth tight end option. Do you think he's better than Evan Ingram?
I think talent-wise, I think OJ Howard is like an elite talent. I was actually watching some George Kittle footage yesterday, though, and let me tell you, that guy, you watch his highlight reel, it is absolutely insane. I don't know.
It is.
I think
we might have been watching the same thing.
he's
Yeah.
like he's like a Gronkowski type. I'm not even kidding, but he's faster. And it's like he never goes down. It's insane. Like I wasn't that high on him coming in, but if he floats to me in the third round, I mean, I know that this is off topic because we're talking OJ Howard here, but if George Kittle, he looked good, and when he was really thriving in the first 3 games with Jimmy G, and he's going to be right back in there. So
yeah, I expect a lot of big things from San Francisco this year.
Yeah, I think they're going to turn it around. Kyle Shanahan's a good coach, a good offensive coach especially. So all right, well, so we're moving on to one of the chattier cats in the league. Hello, Fantasy Fanatic. He's got probably one of the best running back cores in the league. And then he's got Robert Woods on top of it. But after Robert Woods, it kind of drops off. And I'm not a big fan of Lamar Jackson, but I really do think he's got the most solid running back core in the league. What do you think?
Well, I hope he would have the most solid running back core in the league. He spent a lot of draft capital there, and if I know he's a very active guy.
Very active.
You know, as far as trades and just, talking in the group and whatnot and all that fun stuff. So I know he's definitely going to put out there and try and make some trades. I've seen him kind of put out a couple offers there. I think he's going to have to move some of these guys. Now, personally, if it was me, I would probably move Josh Jacobs because he's the highest touted rookie as far as ADP is concerned. But I think that Montgomery is probably better than Jacobs at the end of the year. But
yeah,
Jacobs could get some crazy Ezekiel Elliott type volume. So you got to kind of throw a dart at the board. The Jalen Samuels thing kind of blows my mind. You could have totally went receiver there. We've talked about that in depth already. But I like Singletary, but I also don't think that he's going to be the number one there. He's 5'7". Yeah. I don't think that he has a feature back role or build, I should say. But as far as his receivers go, it's looking really bad every day for him because I like Woods. But Woods is the only person when Cooper Kupp is out that actually benefits from Cooper Kupp not playing because he gets to play that slot role.
Right.
Jamison Crowder, it looks like he may be okay, but he's a guy who could be banged up, and he was always banged up in Washington, which is why they had to move on from him. Andy Isabella may be the wide receiver number 4 or 5 on that team. So there, and then your tight end's Jack Doyle. There's holes here, and if you don't start selling some of those running backs or package, something up there, he's going to have trouble come halfway through the season.
Yeah, I'm just right. Like I said, I think he probably has the best the running back core in the league. But the wide receivers really do scare me. I love Robert Woods. I think Robert Woods is a high end wide receiver too. I love him at the wide receiver 2 spot. If he can balance it out, I can't see his lineup right now. So I think he honestly only has to start one other wide receiver. But those running backs are super solid. I'm the same as you. I'm not as high on Josh Jacobs. I think his ADP has risen. I mean, for running backs to be super efficient, they need to be on top 10 teams or top half of the offenses. So unless Oakland is really good this year, which, I mean, it's football, you really never know who's going to come out and be good. So if they do come out and be good, Josh Jacobs could be an absolute steal. But as it sits right now, I'm just worried about the touchdown percentage, and I'm a lot higher on a guy like David Montgomery who's playing on a team with the Chicago Bears, and they're going to have the ball a lot, and he catches the ball. He's kind of like a better Jordan Howard. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, Nagy wants a 3-down back, and he's been very adamant about that. And I think that's why they got rid of Howard for next to nothing and sent him to Philadelphia. Got a little bit of capital for him. But, Marlon Mack's great running back. Josh Jacobs, Montgomery, they're all great running backs. My concern is that Marlon Mack is not exactly a catching back, so to speak. There is Nyheim Hines there who takes over the third down role a lot. They want to keep Mack fresh. He does have some hamstring issues from the past. Josh Jacobs is joining a team where Antonio Brown's there. Right. Antonio Brown's going to get a lot of big plays on those third downs and things like that, where right. Josh Jacobs may not be used as much. So that PPR bonus, which is something that I really think is huge in a 20-person league, his team doesn't quite have that outside of David Montgomery. But overall, with that running back core, man, he could still win some games. I just think halfway through the season, when he's got to play some more balanced teams, he's going to have trouble.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I like his core. I think he's got a great squad. As long as all those guys show up, the only thing I'd be worried about is one of them, gets injured or has to sit out a week. That could be an issue. I'm pretty high on Marlon Mack this year, just because He's got the best offensive line in football coming into the season. Highly productive offense, a lot of options. I mean, as long as they're moving the ball in the red zone, Marlon Mack is going to benefit from that, as long as he can stay healthy. So, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah. I don't not like Mack. I just kind of wanted to shine on the point of these guys aren't exactly your PPR guys.
Right. No, I agree. They're not guys that are going to steal the show. You're going to have them be efficient on the ground. I think David Montgomery will probably be the best pass catching back on that team. But Josh Jacobs caught the ball pretty well in college, so I guess we got to see how they use Jacobs. I mean, this is one of those teams we're going to have to see how it pans out. If Jamison Crowder somehow is relevant where he's getting 8 or 9 points, I think it could be a good team. I'm not a fan of Lamar Jackson personally, just because I think that he lacks the really big boom that I want from my quarterback. That's possible. Those 30-point games, So, all right, so we're moving on then to our 8th team, getting down to the end here. The fantasy football buff. What did you think about this guy, Angelo?
So, Buff's team is intriguing, to say the least. He did some things that I really like, and then he did some things that I'm kind of like, what the hell did you do? So I don't mind Kirk Cousins with the late round pick. I don't mind Josh Allen with the late round pick. Due to popular belief, I do not hate Josh Allen. I just couldn't believe that I was seeing him drafted so early in 12-person drafts.
Right.
But Devontae Freeman, not a big fan. Rashad Penny, I'm a fan, but there's no other running backs there, so that's a little scary.
Yeah, right.
And then your receivers, Julian Edelman is a good receiver. Last year, after he missed his 4 games, he was a top 12 wide receiver all the way through the rest of the season, which is actually his highest per week finish he's ever had in his career. But Julian Edelman, everyone forgets, this is a guy that misses a lot of time due to injury, and he's already got a couple nicks and bangs in preseason here. I don't love the offense in Detroit. Kenny Galladay had a lot of opportunities to really, really blow up last year, and he didn't quite do it. When he had other players out like Marvin Jones and Golden Tate, he wasn't getting the extra looks because they weren't there. He wasn't getting the extra production, which kind of scares me. The rest of his players okay. I'm not quite sure what was up with John Ross. I mean, I guess you got to throw a dart at the board eventually. But then his tight end position, I do really like because he's got Kittle, as we talked about. We really like him. And then he's got Jordan Reed, a guy who, when healthy, is very well a top 8 tight end. He may be a really good flex play for him. So overall, not a bad team. Just what's up with the running back situation, and the wide receivers, in my opinion, could be a little bit better.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, I like I think the one thing that really stood out to me was me being worried about his running back situation, just only having 2. Devontae Freeman obviously dealing with injury the last few years, but there's really no other guy besides Ito Smith. So I think Devontae Freeman could pay off huge as long as he stays healthy. Rashard Penny, a guy that we just got to see how Pete Carroll is going to utilize him again this year. I mean, the Seahawks are the most run-heavy offense in the NFL, so that's obvious that he's going to be used. But in what sequence or in what form, we don't know yet. I really like the wide receiving core. Julian Edelman at the end of the last season, for those final games where he was in with Brady, he was a wide receiver 1 all those weeks, just getting a lot of consistent. And he's a guy that's going to bring you consistency. A lot of guys leave in town over in New England. So I think that Brady's really going to rely on faces that he knows, since Gronk's gone, Chris Hogan's gone. Who else did they lose last year? Josh Gordon's gone. So I think they're going to look to James White, Sony Michel, guys like Edelman, Kenny Galladay. I'm a little worried with Darrell Bevell coming in as the OC in Detroit, because they're saying how much they're going to run the ball, but I mean, when you're on a team that's not projected to do that well, you're going to have to pass. Am I right? Like, you're going to have to throw some passes. You're not going to be dominating these games, being able to run away with them. And I love the George Kittle pick. Like we were just talking about him. I think he's going to really pan out. I would almost look at George Kittle as his number 1 wide receiver this year. And I like his team for the most part. If Jordan Reed comes up and is a top 8 tight end, like we're kind of predicting, I think he could definitely have a spot in this team for Fantasy Buff, taking maybe Geronimo Allison's spot. But if Geronimo Allison comes in, who knows? I just know as a Packer fan that Rodgers usually supports one wide receiver extremely heavily. Like with Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, he really feeds one guy a lot, and they seem to be the ones who really thrive in fantasy football. Other guys just getting kind of supplemental roles. But overall, I really like his team. The only knock that I would have on this is I don't like the running back depth because the starting running backs are a little bit questionable for my preference.
Yeah, that's a little bit too much risk for me. Like if you were to look at my team, like I said, I feel like we're pretty well balanced. After Ezekiel Elliott, and I don't think he has an Ezekiel Elliott caliber guy on his team, but even after Elliott, we have Eckler, Hines, Thompson, Raquel Armstead, and Rod Smith, who actually Rod Smith is going to get cut, so he doesn't count. But these are guys that could very well, they're not maybe as high as Rashad Penny on the upside,
right?
But they're pretty close. But there's more of them. I got a whole bunch of those guys in case one of them doesn't pan out. What if Rashad Penny doesn't pan out?
No, exactly. And I will say that Mike Davis left town. He headed over to Chicago, so there's 100 carries to be had between Carson and Penny, just divvied up straight from that. So I think he's definitely going to have a role in the offense. But what I'm worried about is both his running backs are extremely injury prone. We saw Rashard Penny; he's been dealing with injuries since he's entered the league, and then Devontae Freeman obviously dealing with them for the last 2 years. But otherwise, I really like his team. I think the wide receiving core is solid, and the addition of George Kittle, it makes that's a pretty solid core in my opinion, especially if Devontae Freeman pans out. So we're moving on to another chatty cat, and that is the underdog. Or is it just straight underdog or underdog fantasy football?
I think it's underdog fantasy football.
Okay,
but. Yeah, you can't really miss him in the group chat. He's always there. He's basically the moderator. He's pretty funny sometimes. He's entertaining for sure. Yeah, but his team is a team very similar to what we just talked about with Fanatic, where he's got Kyler Murray at quarterback and Josh Rosen. Don't love either of those picks. I'm not banking on that particular rookie quarterback. I do like Murray, but I wouldn't die on that mountain having him as my number one.
Yeah, I'm pretty high on Murray this year.
Not that I don't like Murray, but I don't know if I want him to be my number one. That's a big risk. It could pay off. Listen, Pat Mahomes, I drafted him in the 9th round last year in a 12-person league, and people looked at me like I had two heads. Right. That worked out pretty well. So crazier things have happened. It's just a big risk going into the season for me, especially considering there's not much of a waiver wire here, and your backup's Josh Rosen, who is...
Josh Rosen. He's not even a starter.
Well, not yet, but it's Fitzpatrick in front of him, so it's only a matter of time before something happens there. He does get some play, but
That's just not who I want on my squad, though.
Right, exactly. I don't know if I want to go into battle knowing
Josh
that's all I
Rosen
have.
Should not be rostered. I'm sorry, he should not be on a roster.
Throwing a flag on a play there, but his running backs are pretty good. He's got Nick Chubb, Damian Williams, Royce Freeman. Which this morning Royce Freeman sounded like you were just hitting a home run because. I really do like Royce Freeman. He drafted him in the 5th, which kind of blew my mind. But Royce Freeman's a guy who they drafted high. Right. Phillip Lindsay kind of came out of nowhere. But I think he could be good, and Alexander Madison is nice if Dalvin Cook goes down, which we hope that doesn't happen. So his running back core has got 2 great starters and possibly a third guy to plug in that's nice. His receiving core is not too bad. He's got Tyler Lockett, DJ Moore. He drafted Albert Wilson, which kind of broke my heart a little bit because I wanted Albert Wilson late in the draft. Yeah, he's got Cortland Sutton. Yeah, for sure. If he comes in, he's definitely a guy that can make some noise. And then he's got Cortland Sutton. So overall, he's got pretty good balance. It's the quarterback position and the tight end position that kind of worries me a little bit. I know that Joe Flacco likes his tight end, but Noah Fant isn't really doing too much for me there in that category. Chris Herndon I actually do like, but he's suspended for 4 games. So you might have to weather that storm a little bit. But overall, his team's not that bad.
Yeah, I think this team is like the definition of like a super high ceiling team, like a lot of risk factors there, but I think it could pay off in the long run. If Damian Williams can hold that job all year for the Chiefs, he'll obviously be a running back 1. Nick Chubb, I think, is going to receive that RB1 value all the way until Kareem Hunt comes back. I mean, a lot of people say that Kareem Hunt, they're not going to – I mean, I don't know what's going to happen when they come back. Kareem Hunt's a super talented running back, so we're going to have to see, like, what happens there. I'm with you. I kind of like Royce Freeman. Not a guy that I'm pulling in the fifth, but then again in the fifth at 20, well, we're almost at pick 100. So, I mean, I don't think it's a super crazy pick. I like it just in case something did happen to Lindsey. Someone's got to run the ball in Denver. I just don't think it's going to be a super high-powered offense over there this year.
Well, now you got Theo Riddick there,
Yeah.
who I assume
Right.
is going to kind of take over that Booker role a little bit. There's mouths to feed there. Like I said this morning, Royce Freeman looked great because he's getting a huge nod saying he's killing it in camp, and then they signed Theo Riddick.
Right. Yeah,
And
exactly.
they not that they spent a ton of money on him, but it wasn't just a camp body. Theo Riddick's going to get some playing time. He's there to play.
Yeah, and that kind of throws shade over like Philip Lindsay because Theo Riddick's more of like the Philip Lindsay role, just like kind of elusive and can catch a lot of balls.
Yeah, it's just like I said, the one hole he has for me is quarterback, but it's more of a question mark than a hole. The tight end position right now is a bit of a hole. But other than that, he's got some pretty good starters. Throwing out Nick Chubb, Tyler Lockett, Damian Williams, DJ Moore, and Albert Wilson or Cortland Sutton as your starting roster
Yeah.
or your main core. I wouldn't be too upset about that. That's not bad.
No, I think it's definitely a solid squad. Another team that did well balancing their starting lineup, so I think they're going to be a contender probably this year. I'm just going to go into a quick little bit about why I think Kyler Murray could be a steal this year in drafts is because coming in with that Cliff Kingsbury offense, like all they're going to do is pass the ball. They're going to consistently run out of shotgun. And I think David Johnson could have a big year from it, just like thriving out of throwing the ball all the time. I just really like the upside of Kyler Murray this year. If I'm waiting on a QB to pick one up later, I think he could just be an absolute steal. I'm not saying he's going to be Patty Mahomes-esque, but I think he could be like Deshaun Watson type stuff, just constantly throwing the rock. So I like his team. I think, like I said, I think it's a high upside team. Like you definitely have some risk with Damian Williams and Nick Chubb because we don't know how that's going to pan out once Kareem comes back. But we know until Kareem comes back, Nick Chubb's going to have a ton of value. And I'm sure Cleveland's going to be playing in a ton of primetime games this year as well.
Oh, for sure. They definitely got the hype train behind them. I'm excited to watch them. I am.
No,
I
me
am,
too,
for
me
sure.
too. It's gonna be a good time seeing Odell with Baker. A lot of hype around that team. Let's see. Hopefully they can bring it to fruition. Are you going to watch that game tonight, the Hall of Fame game?
Yeah, I'm going to try and catch some of it. I have some prior obligations a little bit later on tonight.
Right.
But luckily, most of those prior obligations involve me being at the bar where there's a TV. So,
you'll
so
probably be
more than
watching
likely, I'll catch some of it. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to wind up catching like the second half, which as an analyst, we love that kind of stuff. We have to watch preseason, all the boring stuff that you don't want to watch. We got to watch it.
Definitely, I agree. And I mean, this game in particular is usually like the worst game to watch, if I do say so, because this one, like, because it's the Hall of Fame game, so they always do a lot of like introductories in the beginning. So it'll probably take so long, you'll probably catch the first half, not even mean to. But all right, so we're moving on. We'll go to the last guy that we're going to talk about today, because this is number 10, is Fantasy Ambush, I think his name is.
Sports Ambush.
Sports Ambush. Okay, sorry about that.
So Sports has got a pretty nice team. I got to be honest. This was one of my top 3 teams this year.
Right.
So Aaron Rodgers, who I know you like Aaron Rodgers,
wow.
right? Like
Wow.
not much of a reach. So Derrick Henry, I like Derrick Henry. I do like Jordan Howard, which is funny enough. I just got an update on my phone how Miles Sanders looks like the clear-cut starter. But I think Jordan Howard takes that LeGarrette Blount role, and Philadelphia really missed that role last year. And I think that was a big difference in those two teams between 2017 2018. And actually, he's got a guy real quick named Gus Edwards. Everyone's talking about Mark Ingram. Everyone's forgetting Gus Edwards was a great fill-in player last year running into the fantasy playoffs.
Right.
Definitely a name that I don't hate, especially in a late draft. And then moving on to his receivers, got Antonio Brown, Cooks, DJ Metcalf, Cole Beasley. And Mark Andrews is his tight end, who I love, and Greg the Leg Zuerlein. So you got to love Greg the Leg.
Yeah.
I think he's got great balance. I think he's got a great starting core. I'm not really into DJ Metcalf like that, but I think Cole Beasley's a little bit sneaky in a
Right.
deeper league like this.
Yeah, no, I think Cole Beasley, like, I think he could be like a sneaky little low outlet play for Josh Allen a lot, and we could see him kind of just he'll obviously have a very low ceiling, maybe like 11 or 12 ceiling unless he gets a touchdown, but I think he's a guy that could step in and maybe give you that consistency. I want to go out on a limb and say that this is my favorite two wide receiver, two core in the league. Antonio Brown and Brandon Cooks and Derrick Henry with Aaron Rodgers. This team could absolutely like blow you out one week, just because there's a lot of high-powered options. If Derrick Henry went off, Antonio Brown went off, and Cooks went off, it's going to be a dangerous situation, especially with Aaron Rodgers over the top. I myself like Jordan Howard. I don't like the Philadelphia Eagles run situation ever, especially since they just picked up Darren Sproles like a week back. So that just shows that they're going to constantly be bringing guys in and out, similar to last season. But I love Antonio Brown, Brandon Cooks, Aaron Rodgers, Derrick Henry. I think that's a squad for 4. Like, that's a nice 4 stack right there. And I agree with you. I really like Mark Andrews coming into this year. He's a super physical guy. Kind of looked like a little George Kittle or something. But the only thing I worry about with any Ravens player is just if Lamar Jackson can get him the ball, and we're going to have to see. So.
Yeah. Well, that's a monstrous question mark. But yeah, I like Henry. I think he's got great upside. He's got some other upside on his bench, the running backs, like we said. But yeah, man, that 1-2 punch of Antonio Brown and Brandon Cooks is great. And he broke my heart. I was drafting Brandon Cooks. He grabbed Brandon Cooks right. Oh, I'm sorry.
Him?
I traded. No, I'm sorry. I take that back. We traded picks. He grabbed Brandon Cooks with that 3rd pick. Now, I wind up turning that into Tyler Boyd and Robbie Anderson, which I'm not upset with because I wanted to find that balance. But when we made the trade, it didn't look like the other guy. Like, Brandon Cooks was the last name in that list that I wanted. And Julian Edelman and a bunch of other guys went. And I'm like, all right, Cooks is going to fall too. Let me just trade this pick, go and get Tyler Boyd so I'm not reaching and get a little sugar on top in the 5th round. And then Cooks wind up falling, and you can't go back on it. And he wind up grabbing Cooks. I really like Cooks this year. I think people forget how great he was for fantasy teams the 2 years prior to last.
Yeah, and I think people are a little bit hesitant on that whole core because they're worried about how the value is gonna be divvied up. But all those guys had value last season, especially with this season, them trying to give Todd Gurley a little bit lighter workload. I think the wide receiving core could even come more into play this year. So I think I like all those Rams wide receivers. I'll take any of them as my wide receiver too. Cooper Kupp last year was, in the start of the year before he tore his ACL, he was unbelievable. But
he was, and what people don't seem to realize, and I said something about it earlier, is that when Kupp is in that offense, Brandon Cooks gets like a 30% increase in targets. Right. It's pretty crazy what he opens up by taking off that safety. So now these defenses can't come in. They can't come in and just play Tampa 2 whenever they want.
Exactly.
Because Kupp's going to destroy them over the middle. They're going to have to play single high coverage, drop some guys down, kind of close off that middle for them. And that's where Cooks is going to thrive this year. I love Ambush's team. He's a team that I don't want to play. Yeah, for sure.
No, definitely. I think it's a team that can boom, and he's definitely one of the best teams that I see coming into this year. But that's all we got for today, folks. This was the Underrated Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you, Angelo, for coming out from Trash Talk Podcast. Go check him out on Spotify. That's Trash Talk Podcast. And what's your Instagram handle?
We are Trash Talk Fantasy Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. We're on Twitter at trash_fantasy. And then whenever you can search us on any major platform. The only one we haven't hit, like I said, is Apple. And all you have to do is search the Trash Talk Fantasy Football Podcast and we'll pop right up.
All right, man. Well, thank you for coming out. I really appreciate you coming on with me and talking about this.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you having me out, man. This is a really good time.
Hopefully we can do this a little bit more coming into the season. But until next time, my friends, mock team motherfucking drop.